There is no bigger comeback story in the history of rock and roll than AC/DC in 1980. So they lose their frontman and singer Bon Scott to alcohol in February of that year. And instead of quitting, they hire Brian Johnson to sing. They fly to the Bahamas and they record Back in Black. Now, to date, that album has sold somewhere in the vicinity of over 50 million copies worldwide. And depending on which list you trust, it's either the second or third biggest selling album ever made. Either way, it's the biggest selling album ever released by a band. Now, a year later, they would drop For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. That hit #1 on the Billboard album chart, and that was the first #1 ever by AC/DC. So by 1982, they were untouchable. I mean, they're playing sold out stadiums and arenas all over the world. They have actual cannons on stage. They have Hell's Bell on stage. And they have a level of dominance that most bands can't even hallucinate about. And then this is where something strange happened. The story kind of goes quiet. So between 1983 and 1988, the biggest, dare I say, hard rock band on the planet drove itself into the wall. They lost their signature sound. They lost their drummer. They lost control of their public image, and they very nearly lost their founder and rhythm guitar player, Malcolm Young, to the exact same thing that killed Bon Scott. So today we're looking at the ugly part that nobody puts on a highlight reel, how success, ego, bad production, and a serial killer almost ended AC/DC, and what it took to claw back yet again. So to understand this fall of the band, you kind of have to understand the exhaustion they were dealing with. Since 1976, AC/DC had been on a punishing loop. You make a record, you tour for 9 months. You make another record, rinse and repeat. So when Bon Scott died, you would think they would have stopped to grieve, but they didn't. They actually pushed the pedal to the metal even down harder. So by the time that For Those About to Rock, that tour wrapped up in 1982, the band, they were cooked. So naturally, what did they do? They stayed on that hamster wheel. They went and made another album, but here's where the first crack shows up. That massive stadium sound that we all got used to hearing on Highway to Hell, Back in Black, and For Those About to Rock, that was built in large part by their producer, Mutt Lange. Now, I've talked about Mutt Lange in previous videos. I believe the guy's a genius. He's also a brutal perfectionist that will make you play the same chord 50 times to fix that timing by just a nanosecond. He'll also spend a day tuning a snare drum. Now, AC/DC, they were pub rockers. They were old school. They hated that kind of stuff. Malcolm and Angus felt the last album, For Those About to Rock, had gotten a little too slick, a little clean or too fixed for their like. So in 1983, they were getting ready to record what would become Flick of the Switch. They decided not to use Mutt Lange. They decided to produce it themselves. Now, Lange wasn't the only one who got cut. Malcolm went through the whole organization. He got rid of their manager, Peter Mensch. He got rid of their longtime photographer. And Malcolm, he was just kind of tightening his grip on everything with the organization. So he decided to go back, they should go back to Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas, where they recorded Back in Black a few years earlier. Same room as they had recorded in before, but totally different record. And here's the problem. There's a difference between sounding raw and being unfinished. Without an outside ear telling them what to do, what sounded good, what didn't, nobody in that room could hear what was missing or what needed to go. And what was missing were the songs. Now, I'm an AC/DC fan. I do like Flick of the Switch. It's got great energy, but it doesn't have a lot of hooks, not compared to what came before it. You've got 10 tracks on there and not a single hit. Now, Brian Johnson, he sang really well on that album, and that's really not the issue. The issue is nothing stuck. It stalled at number 15 in the US, It got to number 4 in the UK. I mean, which sounds decent until you remember what came before it. It eventually crawled to platinum, but that, really took years later. And while the albums on the other side of it were still selling millions, but the record, that was a smaller problem. During those sessions for Flick of the Switch, Phil Rudd, their drummer, he fell apart. The touring had ground him down. His drug and alcohol habits had really kind of gotten the best of him. He'd gotten paranoid and unpredictable. And there's a story from the AC/DC tour manager at the time, Ian Jeffrey, about getting a call at 4 a.m. From Phil Rudd during the Back in Black tour and finding him in his hotel room completely gone, sobbing, having a nervous breakdown, and telling him not to tell Malcolm. Because Malcolm had no patience for anything that threatened the music. The tension between Rudd and Malcolm kept climbing until it turned physical in the studio in the Bahamas in 1983. And now here's the story and the detail a lot of people get wrong. Phil Rudd already finished his drum tracks for Flick of the Switch, so he does play on that album. The band did end up bringing in a session drummer, BJ Wilson from Procol Harum, to finish the job, but they never used a note of that drummer's tracks. Publicly, the band said nothing about it, really. The story was basically that Phil left to spend more time with his families and his car enthusiasm. Angus Young even told Circus Magazine at the time, we're a rowdy bunch, but we don't fight with each other. They ended up auditioning a large number of drummers, and they even auditioned Simon Kirke from Bad Company and Paul Thompson from Roxy Music. But ultimately, they ended up hiring a 20-year-old drummer from Oldham, England named Simon Wright. Now, Simon Wright was a monster, and he's still a monster drummer. He plays heavy, precise, tight on the beat. But that's just it. He plays precisely on the beat. Phil Rudd played a little behind the beat. That lazy drag is what made AC/DC swing. And it's the whole reason that you tap your foot when you hear Back in Black or Highway to Hell. It's not something you really notice until it's not there anymore. And on the next album, Fly on the Wall, it's gone. That's all Simon Wright right there. And no offense to Simon, he's a fantastic drummer, but he's not Phil Rudd. So Fly on the Wall came out in June of 1985. They recorded that in Montreux, Switzerland at Mountain Studios. Angus and Malcolm produced it alone this time as well. But this time, they buried Brian Johnson's vocals so deep in reverb that on some songs you can't really make out the lyrics. Critics hated it. It stalled at number 32 in America, and now they weren't finished. In January of 1985, they broke off those sessions. They broke off the sessions to headline the first Rock in Rio festival, which they played to over 250,000 people a night. The rest of the world was still showing up to see AC/DC, but in America, it's a little bit different. I mean, on MTV, when you show AC/DC back during that period, and you're putting them next to Motley Crue, Rat, Twisted Sister, Dokken, AC/DC suddenly looks like your dad's band. And then it went from bad reviews to the evening news. That summer, Los Angeles was being terrorized by a killer that was called the Night Stalker. On August 31st, 1985, police caught the killer, Richard Ramirez. 2 days later, AC/DC opened their American tour, and details came out that were tailor-made for Panic. Police said an AC/DC cap was found at one of the crime scenes, and they claimed Richard Ramirez told them that the 1979 song by AC/DC off Highway to Hell, Night Prowler, pushed him to kill. A childhood friend of Ramirez's even confirmed AC/DC was one of his favorite bands. Now that was all it took. News anchors, they went on national TV and they announced AC/DC stood for Antichrist, Devil's Children. People magazine ran an article with the idea that Ramirez had been reprogrammed by heavy metal lyrics. City councils in different towns around America were trying to keep AC/DC from playing their towns. And here's the part that gets left out. That same year, the PMRC put AC/DC on its Filthy 15 list, but they were listed for the song Let Me Put My Love Into You, which was flagged for its sexual content. So while the news was calling them devil worshippers, the actual censorship campaign was going after them for a dirty love song. Nobody involved was paying attention. They just needed a target, and AC/DC had no idea how to fight being that target. They didn't have a PR machine, no crisis strategy, just stubborn guys from Australia who got defensive when reporters asked them questions about it. Malcolm tried to explain that Night Prowler was just a blues song about a kid sneaking into his girlfriend's window while her parents were asleep. Angus pointed out that all their songs were just tongue-in-cheek. But it didn't matter. It didn't land. It never does. The Costa Mesa, California show got canceled. Parents picketed the venues. The link between Ramirez and that song was mainly built by the media, but that didn't matter at this point. The damage was done. Now, here's the part your average AC/DC retrospective skips completely. In May 1986, the band released Who Made Who. It was the soundtrack for Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive movie. Now, it was mostly old songs, but it had 3 new ones on there. On paper, it's a cash grab, like a lot of those kind of compilations are, but it saved them. It hit number 33 in America and number 16 in the UK, and it's gone 5 times platinum ever since. It put You Shook Me All Night Long back on the radio in front of a brand new audience of people. Without it, the band was genuinely in trouble. And that's the first sign that they were learning. Get an outside producer. The title cut, Who Made Who, was cut with Harry Vanda and George Young, and that was the team that made the first 5 AC/DC albums. So they went back to the well for the next record, Blow Up Your Video, which came out in January of 1988. And they recorded that at Studio Miravillain in France. So that was produced by Harry Vanda and George Young. And George and Malcolm, George was Malcolm and Angus's older brother. Now, this strategy worked. UK ended up at number 2. US, number 12. It was platinum in America. Their biggest album of new material since For Those About to Rock. Grammy nominated with Heat Seeker, hitting number 12 in Britain. And that was the highest charting single of their entire career at that point, and a record that would stand for 25 years. So commercially, they were back. Except Malcolm was killing himself slowly. He'd always been a heavy drinker, but the pressure of holding this thing together over the period of the 80s had turned it into something else. He toured Australia, he toured Europe, and then in May of 1988, before the American leg, he stopped. He felt like Jekyll and Hyde. He felt he was letting people down. He wasn't brain dead, but he was physically and mentally wrecked by the alcohol. The toughest guy in the business walked off on his own, and he checked into rehab. Nephew Stevie Young came in on rhythm guitar. Now that's rock bottom there. I mean, the biggest album in years, and the man who built the band or helped build the band couldn't get on the bus. So what should they have done? Should they have stopped? I mean, that blue collar work ethic saved them in 1980 and made them bigger than anything, and nearly killed them by 1985. 1 year after For Those About to Rock tour changes everything. If they take that year off, it makes a big difference. Maybe Phil Rudd gets help instead of getting punched by Malcolm Young. Maybe Malcolm Young settles down a bit and catches the drinking before it becomes a life or death issue. Maybe they swallow their pride in the studio. Maybe they didn't need Mutt Lange specifically, but they needed someone in the room, an adult in the room who wasn't in the band, someone who could say, the guitar sounds muddy, the vocal is buried, or this song is not done. And then lastly, they could have learned how to answer a question. Their tough guy silence let the media write whatever it wanted for 2 straight years. But the great bands aren't the ones who screw up, because most of them do screw up. They're the ones who eventually figure it out. Now, Malcolm got sober. He came back sharper than ever. Simon Wright quit as the drummer in 1989 to join Dio, and they replaced him with Chris Slade, a Welsh veteran who had played with Manfred Mann's Earth Band, Uriah Heep, and in The Firm alongside of Jimmy Page. Then Brian Johnson had to step aside to finalize a divorce. So Angus and Malcolm wrote the entire record themselves, music and lyrics for the first time since Bon died. That arrangement, that stuck. They wrote every AC/DC song after that, straight through the Power Up album in 2020. And on a tip from label executive Derek Shulman, they hired Bruce Fairbairn to produce. Fairbairn had just produced Slippery When Wet for Bon Jovi and Permanent Vacation and Pump for Aerosmith. And he knew how to make a rock record sound big. He pushed Brian's voice to the front. He made the guitars sound like chainsaws. And they ended up cutting it at Little Mountain Studios in Vancouver. The Razor's Edge came out on September 24th, 1990. Track 1 opens with a rhythmic guitar figure that sounds like electricity running down a wire. Then the drums stop. Thunderstruck. It went to number 5 on Billboard's rock chart, and it turned into a permanent fixture. It's still played at Tampa Bay Lightning games every night. Money Talks hit number 23 on the Hot 100, their first American top 40 since 1981. The Razor's Edge went to number 2 and has sold over 5 million copies in America. The slump, it was over. The mid-'80s nearly finished AC/DC between bad calls, addiction, silence when they should have spoken. But it's also the thing that proved that they could take a punch. Yet again, take a punch. They learned that momentum isn't the same as greatness, that you have to protect the chemistry, that you have to let someone else tell you the truth about your own record, and that sometimes the bravest move a working class band can make is to put down the tools, heal, and let time pass. So here's my question for you. If you could hand AC/DC one do-over from that stretch, what is it? Should they have kept Mutt Lange? Should they have kept Phil Rudd? Or just take a year off after 1982 for those about to rock tour? Drop it in the comments below. I really want to know what you all think. I do read every one of them, and I'll reply to a lot of them. And if you like this kind of story, my book Near Miss, Alternate Histories of Rock's Greatest Personnel Decisions, it's available on Amazon right now, and the link for that is in the description box below. So hit that like button. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next video. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.